To Prune's summer flowering shrubs, find out with Gardener's World. It's on Wednesday next week at 9. Right now on BBC Two, hats on, the sun has been shining down.
Hello, welcome to our final programme from the RHS Hampton Court Palace Flower Show, an event supported by Viking Cruises. This has been a week packed with flowers, gardens, people, and an awful lot of sunshine too. It's been hot, hasn't it, Joe?
It's been really hot. Well, it's hat weather, Monty.
I don't often see me in a hat, but you do need it. And of course this means that the plants have been wilting, some of the people have been wilting too, but in the sunshine, surrounded by plants, this is the place to be.
What a better place to be. I still haven't seen all of the show. It runs throughout the weekend, but it's vast, isn't it?
Something about this show, I don't know if it is literally the biggest show, but it does feel like you enter one side, come out the other, and there'll still be bits you miss.
Yeah, and there's a huge range, it's diverse, it's so varied, there really is a lot here. Well, coming up on tonight's programme, Nick Bailey explores the world of orchids, one of the largest plant families, and suggests some great varieties for you to grow at home.
And Carol Klein and Toby Buckland will be looking for plants that will set your garden buzzing, because they are choosing the very best pollinating plants.
And we go to Kent as we follow the Australasian Plant Society as they prepare their Antipodean specimens for their very first Hampton Court. And you can join in the horticultural conversation here. Find us on our Facebook page or on Twitter using the hashtag BBC Hampton Flowers.
Well, it's July and we're coming up to holiday times. And if you're a gardener and you're travelling, of course you're looking for new plants, new ideas, and thinking, well, I could do that. I could do that at home. Well, you don't need to travel far because we've got 3 gardens filled with exotic ideas for your garden at home.
Well, I've landed straight on my horticultural feet and been transported to the heart of northern Spain. And of course, we think of Spain as being very dry, very arid, and it is in the south, but in the north, in Galicia, it's much more verdant, more lush, more green. And this represents the garden of a patho, one of the manor houses, and they would have had large, quite formal gardens, but also these very intimate spaces for the family. Now in northern Spain they also grow camellias, so we've got this one here in the corner of the garden. Of course it's no longer in flower, but there are touches of flower around the garden. There's this lovely water lily which has a similar shaped flower to the camellia, so it picks up on that, and of course the blue of the hydrangeas in the containers. We've also got vines just rambling up the columns. But what I love about this garden is also its informality, its sense of place, because there are weeds everywhere. We've got woodruff, we've got wild strawberries, we've got hart's tongue ferns, all sorts of things just sort of creeping around the path and around your feet where you walk. It's a wonderful garden, very romantic and with a really special atmosphere.
So while Rachel is in Spain sunning herself, I've come down to Southend, and you might laugh, but actually for me, it's the place I used to go to as a kid. There's an importance to this garden, and actually it's about 125 years of Southend being a borough, designed by Tony Wagstaff. This garden was built by some young offenders, kids from 10 to 18 years old, and they maybe have not picked up a saw or a paintbrush. And look what they've done. And then you look at the planting, and then that takes me back to the 16-year-old on the Parks Department. First thing I learnt to do was propagate 200,000 bedding plants. And the rest of the planting works its way through, and it's all coastal-based plants. It just is a lovely space that gives you that feeling that you're by the seaside. come now to another part of Southend, designed by a lad called James Cullycott, who's actually an apprentice at Buckingham Palace, and yet worked with the same young offenders. And then you look at the planting. It's got a nice feel to it. The grasses work their way through. After that, old favourite, Verbena bonaerensis, which will seed around. And there's one more in the backs, which is Angelica ebony. It's a really stunning plant. These are going to go back to Southend and be rebuilt, and I think those kids are going to be proud when they walk past that.
Well, Adam, I think there is an airport at Southend, but I don't think it does long-haul flights. No, it's just domestic. I'm in the US of A. This is the Oregon Garden, and this is a real hybrid of influences. But what I like about it is it does feel like a cohesive design, a really lovely little garden. Now, over here, there is a very significant rose. This is the Portland rose, and Portland is known as the City of Roses, but this is actually the parent of all the damask roses. And then there's the Japanese influence in this garden too, another layer working nicely. And here we've got the Japanese maples. And they enjoy not too much wind ripping through, so the pines are actually protecting them. Of course, you can't have a Japanese garden without some water, and here there's a pool of reflective water right in the centre of the garden. And when you look at the reflection of it, it's like a composition in itself. So there's actually quite a lot going on in this garden. It's not just seeing plants and the way they grow and how people design gardens in different parts of the world. It also gives an insight into the local culture too. So wherever you go, try and include some horticulture in your holiday. Well, if you're heading abroad, whatever your destination, there's one plant you're likely to discover, and that's an orchid. They're massively popular in the UK as houseplants, and that trend is set to continue as more unusual and exciting plants are made available. Well, to investigate which orchid may be the right one for you and how best to care for it, Nick Bailey is over in the Floral Marquee.
Orchids are elegant, charismatic, and extremely diverse plants. They're distributed all over the world, from the tropics to the subtropics to temperate regions, like here in the UK. And they come from the world's largest plant family, Orchidaceae, which contains over 25,000 species of plants. Orchids are found growing in a range of different environments, from trees to soil to rock. But the one thing that binds them together into the Orchidaceae family is that their reproductive organs are joined into a single unit. There's a huge variety of orchids on display in the Floral Marquee. Lawrence, your orchid nursery has been running for 30 years, but this is your first year at Hampton Court. How's it been going?
Absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic, thank you very much. Had a lot of interest, people asking questions and answering questions, of course, as we help people as much as we possibly can.
Now, a few viewers have sent in questions on social media. So Margaret on Facebook wants to know what happens when the flowers die on an orchid stem. Do you cut them back?
She can cut them back, she can cut them back to a node, or she doesn't have to cut them back because they may start again on the end of the flower stem or branch of their own volition.
Valerie on Twitter is asking us, are there any easy to grow orchids?
Oh yes, Phalaenopsis are the easiest orchids to grow. And the thing about Phalaenopsis is they will tell you when they want water. When the roots are white, they are dry, and when you give them a drink, they will go green.
Brilliant, top tip. And now I'm really interested in orchids that sort of suit particular environments in the home. So what would you recommend for a cool room?
Well, dendrobiums are a cool grower, or in other words, they need a cooler night temperature to flower, so they'll be ideal for a cool room.
They have those lovely long stems and lots of flowers appearing from the side, so a good value as well.
Oh yes, definitely, and scented.
And finally, what about a bathroom?
I think Oncidopsis would be ideal for a bathroom. Not too much light, plenty of humidity, don't let them dry out for any length of time.
Brilliant, that's some fantastic tips. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
if you find an orchid that you like, it can be very difficult to find exactly the right place to put it in your house. In fact, that's true of any really exotic plant. Finding something that will thrive in a steamy bathroom or a very dry living room, anywhere indoors, is tricky. But Toby Buckland goes to the Butterfly Dome and looks at plants that will be more than happy growing indoors.
This dome is amazing. It's got a wonderful echo to it, and it's as warm as a jungle, it's as lush as a jungle. And you might think it's an odd place to speak about houseplants, but actually, much of the greenery that we use in our homes also comes from a jungle. And the butterflies are certainly fooled. You probably recognise this. The old rubber plant. It's in so many front rooms because it can survive in low light levels in a dry atmosphere. And that's because in our homes it's fooled into thinking that it's a sapling waiting for its parents to topple over and open up the sky and let the light into it. Because when it gets light and warmth, this thing is big. I mean, this plant's a big one as they go. This little fella will never get out of hand. It's a spreader called Tradescantia. I think it always looks really nice in baskets in a kitchen, just trailing over. It's also a good plant for low light because it has this trick. Basically, the back of the leaves have this purple lining to them, which is a bit like the back of a mirror. So as sunlight passes through the chlorophyll-filled leaves, it hits that mirrored back and then bounces through again. So they kind of get two bites of the light cherry, as it were. Good for low light levels, dead easy to grow, just don't overwater it. Now this is croton, and I always think croton's a good plant for kitchens. It's got a lovely fiddle leaf to it, and what a colour. I say kitchens because it doesn't like getting too cool. In winter it wants to be above 10 degrees C, and your kitchen's the heart of the home, and it never gets too cold in there, so it can cosy up with you. Whereas this fella, look at this, a bit of the plant at the moment, it's just beautiful when it's backlit. The sunlight comes through it, so ideal for a bathroom window with a bit of humidity. Of course, it's the peace lily. You see lots of these for sale, but I remember 30 years ago they weren't quite so ubiquitous. Finally, you can't be in a butterfly dome without mentioning this little house plant. It's called lantana, and it's a weed right across the Mediterranean, so it likes it quite dry. If you've got a porch or a south-facing windowsill, this is the plant for you. It can survive indoors in winter, and it flowers pretty much all year round. And in summer, it can go outside in a pot of its own, where it will not only brighten up your patio, but it'll also provide nectar for less exotic but native butterflies too.
Most of us have a concept of our perfect rural Italy, filled with beautiful plants and wildlife, and we enjoy and revere it accordingly. But the designer Martin Wilson feels that we overlook many sites that are rich with natural wonder. And so we went to Longbridge in Birmingham to look at one of those sites.
Across our towns and cities you find relics from our industrial past, abandoned and unloved. You drive past them without a second thought. But I look at them differently. These brownfield sites are a great opportunity. My name's Martin Wilson. I'm a former town planner, but I retrained as a garden designer 3 years ago. This is what spurred me on to create this garden at Hampton Court this year.
Production stops at MG Rover as the company says it's run out of component parts.
Today I'm at the former Rover factory at Longbridge in Birmingham on the outskirts of the city. A massive former industrial site. The traditional way to deal with a brownfield site first is to do what we call remediate it. So that's essentially to clean it up and get rid of contaminants on a site. After remediation, then that's when the real development works. But with the economic cycles we have, it might be that sites sit derelict for a while, or in a state of flux, if you like. I understand why that approach is taken, but I would like to promote a new approach where certain elements can be retained. So if there is industrial fabric that relates to the history of a site, is there a way to retain that and weave it into the new landscape that's being created? So nature has started to reclaim this site, and as we walk the site we'll see species have started to self-seed and settle into the soils and the piles of rubble. On our show garden we will have buddleia, 4 or 5 of them at least, and you can see how crowded together they are naturally, and we'll try and recreate that on the garden as well. You can also see different heights of planting and different textures, and we'll also do the same. On other parts of the garden we'll have grasses and we'll have umbellifers as well. I want people to perhaps see the beauty in these spaces, not see them as scruffy and untidy, but to rethink them and think what they might mean to a local community and to nature. There are some really good examples around the world where those memories and that heritage is kept and lives on. One of my particular favourites, and one that's really well known within the gardening and the landscape industry, is the High Line in New York. The High Line used to be an elevated railway that had become derelict. The local community actually kick-started this project, and it's been reimagined as a landscape, as a space that the community can use, and now it's a major tourist attraction. So that's where we see opportunity. It can be financially beneficial to create these spaces. I hope people will enjoy this garden and see the beauty in decay really, and the beauty in dereliction and the beauty in regeneration, and that's a message to everybody, but particularly to maybe to the planning community and to developers, that can we retain some of these elements and see the beauty in them and take that forward and retain some of our heritage.
Martin, the first thing is to congratulate you. This is your first show at Hampton Court, I believe.
It's my first foray south, first time at Hampton Court, and a gold medal. I couldn't ask for anything more.
I think it's richly deserved. This is a lovely garden.
Thank you very much.
And everybody gets it and enjoys it. What's the magic? I mean, what can we learn from this and do at home?
I wish I knew the magic myself. I think I've got to be very measured in the planting style to not overplant. So I indeed withdrew a few plants to get this naturalistic feel and mimicking that natural succession, how these plants do seed themselves.
And to get the essence of these brownfield wild sites that I know you want us to celebrate.
Yes.
We don't just mimic, do you? You can't just copy it and expect it to become a garden.
No. It's a translation, I would say.
Okay.
It's a translation that suits your garden, actually, because each of these sites in their own right have different aspects and different soils, and you can then translate that into your own garden and pick the right species for your garden.
Now, you talked about the High Line in New York, which we all admire and is wonderful. Do you think we can translate that to some of our ex-industrial sites? Can we make them into lovely gardens?
The site I visited in Birmingham, they've uncovered a watercourse that's been buried for 100 years, created a new linear park. So we can create these spaces, and with the High Line and with the Landschaft Park in Germany, you increasingly, I think, see this coming to the fore.
Presumably commerce and the value of the land will make that trickier.
Of course, and it's a fine balance, and I appreciate that land has a value and we need places to live and we need industry and business, but we also need green spaces for our own health to reduce air pollution for climate change.
You've made a beautiful garden.
Thank you
You're
very much.
surrounded by people who are loving it. You've won a gold medal. Enjoy it. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Monty. Really
Thanks
appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, our brownfield sites may be an important resource of beauty for us, but they're more than that, because they do attract a lot of wildlife, and especially insects, and even more importantly, pollinating insects. They are the absolute essential ingredient of a healthy ecosystem, and of course that includes our gardens. And Carol and Toby have been going around the show finding the best plants to attract pollinators.
The buzzing of insects in our beds and borders is one of the most evocative sounds of summer. There are so many winged insects just waiting to pollinate our flowers, and it's our job to oblige them. Hoverflies make an enormous contribution to the pollination of our garden flowers, so much so that they're sometimes known as flower flies. They're quite distinct from bees. They have 2 big eyes on the front of their heads and only 2 wings, as opposed to the 4 that all bees possess. They love all sorts of flowers, but they have a lot of particular favourites. This is one of them. This is a gorgeous achillea. Hoverflies love this because it's a great landing stage, but what they're after, as they are with almost all the flowers that they pollinate, is the nectar that's buried deep in each of the little flowers which composes this head. The pollen's all over their body, their heads, their legs, and it's moved around not only from flower to flower within that flower head, but also to further flowers. It's an absolutely brilliant process. Achilleas are members of Asteraceae, the daisy family. Daisies are attractive to hoverflies, and flowers like this coreopsis are manna from heaven for them. Sanguisorbers have a series of tiny flowers that open in succession and are rich in pollen, offering treats to passing hoverflies. Can I stop you? Sorry to accost you, but can I borrow one of your plants just for a minute? You came past at the perfect time. So this is a demonstration of exactly what sort of flowers are pollinated by moths. This is Gladiolus murieli, comes from Ethiopia. And in the evening, these flowers emit the most delicious perfume. And that's a sure sign that it's pollinated by moths. And further proof is, if you look at the flower, it's got this great long corolla tube here. Ethiopian moths must have a very long proboscis, and it goes right into the flower, right down to the base of it, sucks out that gorgeous nectar, and as it's doing that, it moves pollen from its body and from the anthers here onto the stigma, the female bit of the flower, and pollination takes place. It's a pretty brilliant device. It's great to encourage hoverflies and moths into our gardens, but long before they were around, it was beetles who pollinated primitive flowers like magnolias and water lilies. Evolution has a wondrous way of making sure all our flowers get pollinated.
This is the butterfly garden at Hampton Court, and I've always been fascinated by butterflies. I mean, the painted lady, for example, migrates thousands of miles to our shores every summer to feed from the flowers in our gardens. And when you see butterflies doing that erratic flutter-by thing, you'd wonder how on earth they fly around any garden, let alone that far. The truth is, though, they're only bobbing up and down to look for flowers that will provide them with nectar from plants that you can have in your garden to encourage them. The butterfly bush buddleia is a good starting point because it has a tubular structure to its flowers, and because butterflies have long tongues, only they and not the bees can harvest the nectar from the base. And then there's flowers like scabious. It's not a single flower, it's a cluster, and that means that butterflies can land on the flowers because they're nice and large with ease. They can harvest the nectar quite efficiently. It's like a one-stop shop. This is teasel, the country cousin of scabious. And when the flowers are ready, these thistles are just covered with sparkling nectar. Where the stems meet the leaves, rainwater collects. And in that rainwater, unsuspecting insects, they fall in and they drown. But butterflies, with their long tongues, they can harvest that water, they can take a drink and then fly away to safety. Providing food with flowers for the butterflies is good, but even better is to spare an area of garden for food for their caterpillars. Stinging nettles, if they're in sun, are fantastic food plants. When they hatch out, well, it's just a miracle of nature in your garden. It's wonderful.
I know people tend to think of butterflies as a kind of summer adornment to their gardens. In fact, they represent the situation of all insects, and that agriculture's been a disaster zone for insects over the last generation or so. So gardeners really are the front line. Yeah. They have to act.
No, we can make a huge difference in my garden. And it's not just growing, you know, the odd buddleia here and there. It's about getting a good combination of plants.
The one other thing I would stress is that caterpillars are part of the butterfly cycle. So if you've got caterpillars munching your prized plants, think that you are just feeding beautiful butterflies.
That's a lovely way of looking at it. Just let them munch away. Yeah. And also, this hot, dry summer this year can only be a good thing for butterflies, certainly. Well, still to come, I'll be talking to garden designer John Warland and trying to get my head around his quite difficult conceptual garden here at RHS Hampton Court, an event supported by Viking Cruises.
And Toby Buckland will be chatting to a first-time exhibitor here, and particularly talking about all the problems of bringing your exhibits to the show.
And we join some other first-timers, the Australasian Plant Society, as they bring their Antipodean plants to Hampton for the first time.
But first, we have Adam Frost's final instalment in his look at the plants that are on display and used here at Hampton Court and how they can be best employed by you in your garden at home.
What better way to spend a lazy afternoon just laying out on your lawn? But I think it's a plant that we take for granted. If you think about it, grass is the most successful plant on the planet. It covers a quarter of our land. Our relationship goes back to hunter-gatherer times. But in modern day living, what does it really bring to our gardens? If you want a decent lawn, they do take some looking after. So the first thing, when you're creating your garden, decide what you want from this surface. The amount of times I've created gardens and we've planted them first and we've added the turf at the end, and the moment that turf goes down, it really sort of pulls the garden together. You know, if you want your design to feel a little bit more relaxed, maybe just letting some of that lawn grow and cutting those pathways through can give you sort of a really mellow feeling. Or like this, just let it go totally. And your grass really pushes on. And you end up this time of year with these beautiful sort of brown seed heads. You leave this to the end of August, trim it all down, and it will come up again next year. It's really lovely. You know, over the last 30 years, ornamental grasses have really come into their own, and they've been used really cleverly in this garden. If you look at these big hedges, you know, that could be quite static, but because of the grasses are planted, it sort of brings movement and brings it alive. I mean, I think if you think about maybe evergreens in your garden, that doesn't change throughout that year. The moment those grasses go in and the seed head moves, it becomes a different picture. You know, another good idea is sometimes to use your materials to inspire your planting palette, and here it's been done beautifully. These lovely sort of sculptural fins are picked up in the grasses, but it doesn't stop there. The grasses then work really well with the paving. And maybe that meadow back there was a little bit too wild for you, but what about an ornamental meadow? You know, here the grasses work their way through the herbaceous planting, but that's not just good in the summer. You know, I would leave that and it would add structure all the way through the winter. Going out there in a November morning with a frost and the sun shining through, That would look absolutely stunning. Have you ever thought about using the grass as a screen? I know, bamboo, but actually it's a grass. This is Phyllostacis aurea, lovely clump forming grass that gets up, gives you wonderful height, but also when the wind blows through this, it gives you sound in the garden, so it adds to that atmosphere. And this also feels cooler in here. Cracking plant.
Now, traditionally, show gardens begin their life with a brief which sets out a central message, whether it be highlighting a personal journey or a global issue. But that message should be translated really clearly throughout the finished garden. Earlier, Arit Anderson, Mark Lane and I took a look at 3 very different gardens to see if their message comes through loud and clear.
This is On the Edge, designed by Frederick White, and it tells the story of the journey that you go through when faced with mental ill health. As you can see, this narrow path kind of gives you that sense of enclosure, and all of the planting is quite monochromatic, quite dark, quite moody. And we have things like these dark canna lilies or the white ghost of the eryngium. And this pool here is a fractured mirror, and you can't really sort of see your face in it properly. And then as I come up onto the steps to this very narrow pathway, which is quite perilous really, I'm really wanting to watch my feet here. The journey now starts to open out, and then as you come down, the steps begin to widen and you're faced with a much more open space. The mirror is reflected here as it was on the other side, but this time it's clear and I can look in and see my face. I can see that the planting is a lot more optimistic. So seeing the canna lilies repeated here, there's more colour in them. There's the use of the eryngiums, which when we saw them there was a ghostly pale silver colour, and here there's more of a hint of the blue that's coming through. There's still a spikiness, there's still a bit of darkness, the canna lily again repeated over here, that says that when you're going through mental ill health, even though there is optimism, there's that work that has to be done. So, has the garden hit its message? What it says to me is that when one views mental health, it's a lot different to when you have to experience it. And I think that's reflected in this garden. It's only when you walk through it that you can really understand the message that it's delivering.
This is The Power to Make a Difference garden by Joe Francis, and it is about man's destructive power on this earth, but also how nature can prevail. Now, Joe actually won a silver for this, so it has split opinion. You have this path leads you through into the garden. You've got the rubble, you've got stumps where nothing is growing out of them. But as you gradually come round the garden, there's a spiral and it leads you through to this naturalistic wildlife planting. Just by introducing some plants, some trees, a log pile, you're going to introduce nature into this space. And of course, when we think about man's destruction on this earth, we think about the melting polar ice caps. And that's shown here by this enormous block of ice. Now, as the ice melts, you'll gradually start to see some flowers appear, because there are irises just inside that ice. And then the water will dissipate into the soil and feed and nurture the ground. But it will also leave a wonderful pool so birds can start coming in. So actually, nature will prevail. Whether you like it or not, I think the message is loud and clear.
Now, one garden you might not understand at first glance is this one. It's called Kinetica. It's designed by John Warland, and it's inspired by the botanist Robert Brown when he suspended pollen of Clarkia pulchera in water. He observed it under a microscope and came up with what was later to be known as Brownian motion. Well, it's obvious, isn't it, really? I don't know about that, but it's certainly an intriguing garden, and the pools of water, when you look into them, are simply magical. So, John, I vaguely remember Brownian motion from school, but I can't really remember what it's about. But that's the basis of your whole design. So, what is it?
It's really a study on movement, this garden, and I wanted to highlight the observation of pollen grains only when they're in a liquid or a gas, where they seem to be random rather than structured. So the garden is symmetrical, but if we're able to look at the pollen movement, they are fizzing around in that random Brownian way. And even Robert Brown didn't realise why they were doing it. It took Albert Einstein nearly 100 years later to explain what he'd observed under the microscope.
Okay, so the trees are moving particles. I mean, in the wind, they all move, they can just swirl around sort of in this sort of random movement.
Yeah, they're kind of enhanced by the wind, stimulated. There's movement in every garden, and this is just accentuating it, remembering that every particle is either vibrating or moving around amongst us.
It's a very light breeze now. I mean, they are doing their thing, but actually, you know, they will move. They're fixed to the ground, but they'll move a good old way.
Yeah. Wind not included with the garden.
No, we're not waiting for a little bit of wind. But I love the planting as well, the planting beneath. Things like the echinops and the allium seed heads, they represent what the particles moving around and fizzing around.
Exactly. It's the particles, it's getting that movement, sort of bouncing around the space, colliding with each other. The garden's really about the enhancement of scientific theory through the observation of botanical matter.
You love experimenting. You've been here many years. You've done quite a few conceptual gardens at lots of different shows. You love pushing the boundaries, don't you?
Exactly. It's carte blanche to dream, inspire, make it fun, educational, create something people haven't seen before. Come and enjoy it as a garden. If you want to kind of discuss scientific theory, do so at your leisure.
Lovely to see you again, John.
Thank you very much.
Most of the larger show gardens keep any message or concept buried fairly deeply. You show a garden and people don't need to know why it's made or what it's about to enjoy it. However, this one by Edward Maris is different because its message is, believe it or not, the meaning of life. And this area here represents the past, rich with knowledge and ancient wisdom. It's connected by a rill to this very modern-looking greenhouse, which represents the present, which encloses us, sometimes traps us. There's a seating area in front of which you can step out of the present and contemplate your life. And there, with the bright colours and the hydroponic towers and the coloured flowering, is a rainbow future full of promise. Now, whether a show garden can, or indeed should, have a story that you need to know in order to understand it and enjoy it is debatable. Whether you like it or not is always a subjective opinion. But whatever you think about it, it's certainly thought-provoking. Of course, flower shows always have been a mixture of bright, brave, and sometimes very radical new ideas, and also much-loved exhibits that reappear year after year with much the same contents. And Toby Buckland goes to the floor marquee to see exhibitors old and new.
Whenever I'm in the floral marquee, what I like to do is take a peek at what people have been buying, seeing what's in their bags. It gives you an idea on what the trends are. Colour sells. We all like a bit of instant gratification. But if there's one thing that trumps that, it's the new, because the new is exciting. And that has an effect on the exhibitors here in the floral marquee. It means that they not only have to innovate with their stands and how they look, but also with the plants they bring to the show. Ingrid, you've been coming here for years.
25 years this year, can you believe it?
That's amazing. And Sarah, your daughter, how long have you been coming?
Probably feels like about the same.
Long service.
Yes, very much so.
So in your years exhibiting here, what have you learned?
That it's jolly hard work.
How has your choice of plants developed in terms of what you sell?
Well, when we started, we were a very small nursery, and so our range of plants wasn't enormous.
Yeah.
Now we're confident enough that we know what people will want, and we'll bring the plants to fill that.
What is it you specialise in at Hampton Court?
This year we've decided to bring loads and loads of new phlox because they are such wonderful plants.
People are definitely going for some really bright, bold colours.
Yeah.
They're desperate to bring a bit of their youth into the garden.
Nothing really has to be done to them. You don't have to stake them, and they just sit there and look beautiful.
And if you were to meet someone who was thinking about starting doing this anew, a newbie, shall we say?
Yes.
What advice would you have for them?
Don't think it's quite as easy as you think it might be.
Okay.
It's damned hard work.
Be prepared for the bumps in the road.
Absolutely, and there will always be quite a few bumps in the road.
So, David, this is your first time exhibiting at an RHS show?
Yeah, it is, yes, and first time I put on a display.
How have you found the whole experience?
Nerve-wracking to start with, but as we get into the marquee, it was okay. It wasn't as intimidating as I thought.
So tell me about your grasses. They look, well, stunning.
But I wanted to show the public what you can do with just grasses.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do. I put the fish in just to give it a bit more of a zing. Well, it's coral reef was basically my idea in my head, but hopefully it's the grasses that people look at.
And grasses is something you specialise in?
That's all I grow, yeah.
Do you have any plants that you think are particularly good that ought to be better known that you're going to bring to the market?
Well, in the display I've brought a majority of Pennisetum varieties, and it shows the diverse range that they are. They're a good plant.
Any ones that you really...
Well, Pennisetum orientale varieties are my favourite. The pink ones in different hues and different sizes.
Hardy?
Hardy, completely hardy, yes.
It means a lot then. I mean, this is part of you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's my life. You know, this is what I do. And when it's a cold February and you're potting things up with cold fingers, you've got to remember these days to make it worthwhile.
As well as the nurseries, there are 11 plant societies who also exhibit in the floral marquee, including a new one, the Australasian Plant Society. Now they are showcasing the flora of Australia, New Zealand and the surrounding Pacific Islands. And we caught up with them to find out where their passion for Antipodean plants came from.
I love Australasian plants so much because of their pure diversity. There's so many of them, and that range, people often in this country don't know much about.
They give us the taste of the exotic, weird, wonderful, wacky plants to grow in our gardens. But at the same time, they're actually quite easy if you think about it and give them what they want. This is Tom Hart-Dyke, crazy intrepid plant hunter and president of the Australasian Plant Society, probably one of the youngest presidents of a plant society anywhere in the world.
And this is Robbie Blackhall-Miles, a fantastic chap, a passionate plants person, a wonderful conservationist and a super chairman of the Australasian Plant Society. So many people think of Australasian plants as plants that we can't grow in our country, or plants that come from such dry, hot, arid areas. I mean, immediately you think Australia, Uluru, Ayers Rock, right in the middle there of mainland Australia, and all the lovely red, dusty dirt around it. But the diversity within mainland Australia, North and South Island, New Zealand, and surrounding islands is incredible.
The thing that we also don't realise about Australasian plants is that they're old plants. They come from a time that we've forgotten about. We're talking about 200 million years of evolution. I mean, in New Zealand, a lot of the plants look really strange to us, and we can bring some of that diversity into our gardens here in the Northern Hemisphere.
Here at Luddingstone Castle in Kent, we have a world garden with species from across the globe laid out in a map of the world to represent each plant's origins, of course, including the Australasian continent. This is a fabulous plant. It's the hebe. What a lot of people don't realise is the hebe's from New Zealand with a couple of populations from South America. It's a plant that we've taken to our hearts in this country because it's so adaptable to such a wide range of conditions, from coastal Cornwall to freezing Fife. It's an amazing plant that's adapted to our climate. There are so many cultivars of it, there are so many species, varieties that are still being discovered actually from New Zealand in 2017.
There's thousands of plants from Australasia that most people don't know about, many of which will do very well in the UK. This amazing plant is Pseudopanax ferox, or the toothed lancewood. It's a member of the ivy family. It's quite hardy here in the UK. It comes from New Zealand, which has quite high rainfall, so it likes that, and it likes to be no colder than -6.
I'm so pleased here in the World Garden to have the national collection of eucalyptus trees, and we've got over 65 different types, but my favourite by far is the Woolgan snow gum, or Eucalyptus gregsoniana. The clue's in the name, snow gum. It's from very cold areas of southeast Australia, so it's very, very, very hardy. Its ornamental attributes are just so numerous, with lovely patchwork bark, gorgeous buds developing, lovely glossy and lanceate leaves, and to me it's my favourite eucalyptus tree.
This amazing purple mallow, Aleogani hugellii, comes from South Australia. The amazing purple flowers are actually reminiscent of the mallows that we see in our everyday gardens, but this one's leaves are a little bit more crispy and a little bit more solid. They're really able to cope with drought. After a dry winter and a hot summer like the one we're just having, this plant's going to do really well in British gardens. Plant societies in the UK are actually struggling, but because of the fact that the plants that we grow are so interesting and unusual and diverse, actually our little plant society is suddenly in a strong enough position to be able to go and show at a major show.
Just being part of this special club, and it means so much. In my case, I feel like I'm not alone and the only plant out there who likes Australasian plants.
It's just being able to see all that diversity in one place at the show, which is going to be incredible.
Well, it seems to me you've managed to fit half of Australasia onto this stand. I mean, the variety you've got here is phenomenal.
A lot of these plants haven't actually been seen before at a major show, Rachel, and the excitement of that and sharing the diversity of the Australasian flora is a buzz.
It is amazing. And is this just you bringing it, or is it all the members of the society?
Absolutely not. There's about 15 different people involved in this stand. It's been a tremendous effort on behalf of our members to come and bring them all here to Hampton Court.
So talk me around some of the highlights for you, the plants that are on the stand.
I think for me it's got to be something I've actually collected, and there's 3 eucalyptus trees behind Robbie there that I collected in 1999 from a very cold area in Tasmania, so they proved pretty hardy in this country and proves that modern day plant hunting still continues to this day.
It must be so exciting to have the chance to see plants growing in their natural habitat and then to see them here at Hampton Court.
My red blood cells turn green, Rachel. Honestly, it's really exciting, and the biggest thing that it gives me, the buzz that it gives me, is because I can go in the wild, actually see the conditions that that plant is experiencing, and it's much better. If you've seen it in the wild, it's so much easier to grow these plants.
Really exciting, isn't it? What about for you?
And for me, it's a plant there called Lampertia formosa, or the mountain devil. Yesterday, it was tight in bud. And today it's in full flower. This was the first plant that flowered here in the UK from Australia in 1798. So to have it here on display is
and in flower.
incredible. And in flower.
It's as if it knew exactly the right moment to perform, isn't it? Now, a lot of obviously very unusual plants here, but then there are a few things that I recognise actually used as summer bedding in the UK.
So much of our garden flora does come from Australia. Things like hebes, they come from New Zealand. Things like Squavolia amula is normally a perennial species, but in Britain we have to treat it as a tender annual and replace it every season. But if you bring it into the house, you can keep it going year on year and it looks great.
So what is it you think about the Australasian Plant Society that's creating a bit of a buzz? Because I know a lot of other plant societies are struggling for membership.
I think it's because we are interested in really weird, wacky plants. They're plants that are growing on the edge of what we're actually able to achieve in cultivation here in the UK. But also, we have quite a strong ethos. We're not just about growing the plants, we're also about conserving the plants. And these are plants that people can grow with a little bit of skill and effort.
That's the biggest thing. So many people coming to the show today, you mentioned Australasian plants. Oh, I haven't got a greenhouse. So many people have said that, but actually there are so many throughout the UK that can be grown.
A huge congratulations on your medal as well. It is the most sensational display.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
From plants down under to a garden up north. Designer Will Williams has created a changing world garden to celebrate the North Yorkshire town of Pickering's success in tackling flooding by embracing a natural solution.
Across the UK, flooding has become a massive issue. And Will Williams has returned to Hampton with a novel design solution. Holding Back the Flood is a garden that's taken its inspiration from a town in North Yorkshire called Pickering, who unfortunately got their grant for flood protection turned down. So they had to come up with some really natural solutions as to how they were going to stop those huge bodies of water coming into the town. That included things like planting alders, and the use of them in this garden, I really like it because it really gives a very naturalistic feel. This garden barely uses any hard landscaping materials, and I think that's one thing we have to look at when we're thinking about flood control for the future. Now, what you may not be able to see as well is that it's really attracted some wildlife in here. And I just want to show you this. Will's even picked up this little attention to detail, planting saplings throughout the garden, which would naturally occur. Will, hi, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
You brought a flood to Hampton.
I have.
How did you do it?
Well, it's been hard work. We've actually had to use 52,000 litres of water, and the whole concept behind the garden is all about how to use trees to help prevent flooding.
So how do alders actually work in flood defence then?
It's not actually their root systems sucking it all up, it's more about slowing the flow. And so they act as almost a physical barrier to allow the water enough time to seep into the land.
Tell us about Pickering.
They got turned down a multi-million-pound flood protection grant, and it was supposed to be that that money would go towards building these horrible concrete barriers around their town. I think that there are a lot of places in the country where we could use this sort of system. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to work for every single site in the UK, but I think some modern day developers could be using this sort of structure. So imagine this, but on a huge scale, and when we're talking sort of hundreds of thousands of trees, that's a very big barrier. And they're a fantastic tree, and they can almost survive anything.
You've really cracked it.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you very much.
At every flower show, it's strange how there is one thing that sort of almost niggles at you. You see it and you can't get it out of your head. It could be gloriously big, it could be just tucked away. It might not even be something you realized you wanted, but it's always there. So we thought we would ask the whole team what one thing they really wanted to take away with them in their mind or even physically from this year's Hampton Court Flower Show.
I don't usually use the word fantastic, but that's exactly what this is. I stumbled across it in the Floral Design Studio. It's this imaginative piece of work from students at Writtle College from their floristry department, and it features a fantasy insect, the green man, a wonderful caterpillar and a toadstool composed of lotus heads. It's superb.
I've been lucky enough to see lots of these beautiful South African plants growing in the wild around Table Mountain. But the one I'm really thrilled to see this year at Hampton Court is Polygala. It's a fantastic plant, has beautiful butterfly-like flowers, and will flower for about 6 months in UK gardens, as long as it's on a free draining soil in a protected site. It's a real winner.
This is Martin Wilson's garden, Brownfield Metamorphoses, and it deservedly won a gold medal. Now, I really like this site hoarding and how he's used the street art at the front, but actually what I love are these apertures, and what they do is they give you little frame views of the garden. You can see all the planting, and this one down here, there's one for the children. It's so great because it's almost as if they're in their own little world when they're going to look through and see that view. It's so lovely. I love it.
To the untrained eye, this yew hedge on the corner of the World of Discovery garden, well, people would probably just walk straight by it because it just looks like a normal hedge. But for me, it adds solidity right against the planting of the purples and the yellows. And the solid shape, it leads up to this beautiful verdigris wall. I absolutely love it.
What a treat to discover something completely new at Hampton Court. These are zoonarctic pelargoniums. They've taken 30 years to breed and produce. They've got wonderful new colours, including touches of lemon. Long stems, but also perfect for cutting. I think it's something very special. Watch this space.
This isn't an ordinary azalea. This isn't even an ordinary azalea bonsai. This is a root-exposed azalea bonsai, and it's taken 32 years of carefully washing away the compost as the plant grows to produce this. It's a wonderful serpentine labyrinth. We don't normally see the roots on plants, and this one is as if it's sharing a secret with us. It's wonderful.
Now, do I love this? Looks like a perfectly normal beehive, yes? Well, no, it's a beer hive. There is a microbrewery inside here, and I think every garden should have one. Cheers.
A few surprises there, Joe. It's your turn. What would you like to take back from
It's
this
a
year's
tough
show?
one. I think it's on this garden, actually. I love that tree seat there with the willow work, the craftsmanship in it. You know, it's totally original, and with that lovely oak top. I don't normally go for sort of willow stuff, but I think you could fit that into any style of garden, and it's a great use of space. Under the dapple shade of a tree.
You sold
what
it.
a lovely place to sit. You, Monty, how about
Well,
you?
trees coming to... Do you know, it's funny. I walked in here within 10 minutes. My heart had been stolen. On the children's wild garden, there is a swing.
Yes, I know.
From a lovely cut oak branch, and I just think it's great and fantastic for your outer or your inner child.
I've seen you on it. Yeah. I've seen you swinging on it.
Yeah, it's absolutely lovely. Anyway, you must come and see it for yourself. Come and see all these things here at the show. It's open until Sunday night. You can get all the details on our website, but I'm afraid that is it from us from this year's Hampton Court Palace Flower Show. But for more coverage with a culinary flavour, you can catch Saturday Kitchen live from the show tomorrow morning on BBC One.
But there's still one more RHS flower show of the season. It's Tatton Park in Cheshire, and we'll be covering it on BBC Two on the 20th of July.
And I'll be back at Longmeadow next Wednesday at 9 o'clock. But from Joe, the whole team, and myself here at Hampton Court, that's it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.